Hi everyone, and welcome to my session on this year's edition of the Festive Tech Calendar, where we're going to talk about how to extend the PAW mentality to cover our cloud services. But before jumping into the technical and the savvy stuff that we're going to look at later on during this video, let's take a minute to actually discuss what the Festive Tech Calendar is focusing their donations on this year. So this year we have the fundraiser for Beats on Cancer charity. Head on over to the link in the bottom, justgiving.com/page/Festive Tech Calendar 2024, and hit on that Give Now button. Please, we all need to donate to reach our goal of 2,500 Great Britain pounds. And with that said, let's go into the reason why we're here to talk about this. So my name is Victor Hedberg. I work as a senior technical architect at a Swedish cybersecurity company called TrueSec. At TrueSec, we do a lot of things revolving around cybersecurity. So anything from proactive engagements in terms of red testing. We do a lot of proactive stuff in terms of infrastructure hardening, Active Directory tiering, secure development, and also a lot of things revolving around threat intelligence. And now even human threat intelligence, trying to figure out who those pesky insiders are. Feel free to reach me on my social media accounts listed in this presentation. You can find me on Twitter or X at Hedberg, or on LinkedIn to continue the discussion. So, before we talk about privileged access workstations, we need to understand the concept of a ransomware attack. And this is really what it looks like. So on our left-hand side, we have the initial access vector, which could be anything from phishing, a publicly available exploit, or just, run-of-the-mill password spraying, brute forcing their way through your remote services, which are exposed to the internet. So your VPN services, your remote desktop gateway services, or you get the point, right? Citrix Netscaler, Cisco AnyConnect, whatever, right? After establishing their foothold, they immediately want to have some sort of remote control, commonly known as a C2, so command and control, taken from the military. Really? After C2 is established, we move into the internal reconnaissance phase. Basically just getting the lay of the land, starting to enumerate large parts of your Active Directory environment, your server environment, or your Entra ID environment, or Azure, or AWS, or GCP, or whatever. Internal recon is always the first step. After internal recon, we see the lateral movement parts, so trying to compromise one system to get a hold of a higher privileged credential to move laterally towards the next system, and around it goes. You can see that these three in remote control, internal recon, and lateral movement are kind of like in a circle or a triangle, but whatever. It goes round and round and round until the threat actor has achieved its main purpose, which is to gain full control over the domain or the service per se. Once that's been achieved, we move into the data exfil phase, which is basically, let's steal your data. So, dumping all of the stuff that they know you really need to protect and storing it for themselves. After the exfil, we split the phases into two. We go into backup destruction, basically wiping your backups and disabling any type of antivirus, EDR, whatever, before executing the ransomware. Now, why focusing on backup is of importance for the threat actors is that if they can delete your backups, you're more likely to pay. because you don't have any way to restore your systems. That's the main reason for it, really. So if we convert this graph into a timeline, it looks something like this. And when we're dealing with securing IT environments, really what we're doing is that we are implementing speed bumps to make it harder for the threat actor to achieve their end goal, which is to ransomware your entire IT real estate. So ideally what we want to achieve is that this blue bit at the back, labeled response, we want to make that blue bit extend until, or as soon as possible, really, in this timeline. Meaning that we need to have coverage on all of our endpoints, on all of our servers, and we need to have strict ACLs in place governing access for high privileged accounts. Now the cloud is no alternative to this, so you really need to think in these terms. And the most secure way of achieving this is by using a privileged access workstation. But before we get into the PAW, let's look at the cloud in general for most organizations. So we have an admin. He or she logs into their regular workstation. Sometimes even using multi-factor authentication, they access the cloud management interfaces. So this is not an uncommon practice. I've seen this a lot, both for other consultants and for customers, because it's an internet-facing service. Why bother governing control even more? So if we circle back memory-wise to what we said earlier on the big game hunting slide, the lateral movement part actually comes into play in the cloud as well. Because as soon as we either enable our services for Azure Arc, or we enable Defender for Endpoint or any other EDR tool, we automatically have a C2 channel to our own cloud environment. Meaning, if this admin account over here were to be compromised, that account could move laterally from the cloud down to on-prem. Basically letting the threat actors come in as domain admin by compromising the cloud. Now this is something that we want to prevent. So why is this not enough, this current that we just saw? Well, since the signing can occur from any device, what's stopping you from logging in from your kid's gaming PC? Nothing, really. Because we're not limiting the devices or the geographical locations or the IP-based locations where signing can actually occur. So we're just allowing tokens to be delivered anywhere in the world, which is a threat actor favorite. Meaning, because it can occur from any device, it's actually vulnerable to common attack patterns such as info stealers, a little bit of malware residing on your computer, actively stealing session tokens or cookies or whatever, and perhaps even keyboard logging, so they're seeing what you're typing as you go. Adversary in the middle is one of the main culprits in business email compromise cases nowadays. So just proxying your authentication request to the Microsoft servers, and in the process actually stealing your tokens, preventing you from knowing that your account was actually stolen. So how can we combat this? Well, the PAW. We can also use stronger authentication, or we can even combine the two. So we can say that you need to come from a PAW and you need to use something like a FIDO2 verified hardware key, like a YubiKey. I have a bunch of them because I have a bunch of accounts. So the PAW. Now I asked Bing AI to draw me an image of a privileged access workstation, and as you can see, this workstation is really privileged. We have the leather armchair in the back, a real nice fancy table, and what looks like, I don't know, a backwards mouse. But whatever. So, the PAW. In traditional Active Directory environments, we recommend you build PAWs looking like this. So you have a tiered admin account, regardless of the tier, really. And via using Active Directory domain services functions or features, we can actually tell the account in question which device you can collect a Kerberos ticket on. So in this example, we have the authentication policy silo locking in your account with your PAW, and by ways of using Kerberos armoring or Kerberos compound authentication combined with restricted admin mode, you get like a single sign-on kind of experience. So even if you have 2RDP, you don't need to enter your username and password because you're piggybacking on your Kerberos ticket. This means that we're not exposing the password hash on any other system than the PAW itself, limiting the credential spread from all of your servers to one of your laptops or VMs. So if we take that in mind and I started thinking, hey, how can we achieve the same kind of thing in the cloud environment? And we came up with this particular solution. So we have an admin account using privileged identity management, preferably with an authentication strength tied to it as well, requiring FIDO2 compliant authentication. Logging into a privileged access workstation, or logging in from a privileged access workstation, ideally. We perform the multi-factor authentication via an application or hardware token. As I said, hardware token is preferred. And we add on another joker in the mix, saying that in the conditional access policy, we explicitly block access for these roles except from specific device IDs. And only if all of these criteria are met, you're allowed access into our cloud portal or any cloud management interface, really. Because we can't just rely on, we need to block access to the portals. We also have PowerShell and AZCLI, we have Microsoft Graph, etc., etc., etc. We need to be really strict with all of this. So if we look at the Cloud PAW, we get a kind of the similar idea towards it as we did with the Active Directory PAW. So we have an Azure admin using an Azure PAW, and instead of the Kerberos authentication policy silo, we can, since we don't have Kerberos in the cloud, we rely on conditional access. But you get the point, right? It's the same train of thought or chain of thought towards the cloud. We're just using different components. So let's take a look at these Cloud PAW silos. So in this environment, I have a PAW conditional access policy. And we're targeting this on specific admin roles. So conditional access administrator, global administrator, security administrator, basically any role that can change the state of your entire tenant needs to be covered by such a policy. So there are a number of other administrator roles, but for the sake of this demonstration, we're just relying on these three, because the security admin has full access to your Defender console, the global admin has, and the conditional access admin, well, they can easily wipe this conditional access policy. That's why I chose these three. We also have the privileged role administrator, privileged authentication administrator, etc., etc., etc. The policy is scoped on all resources, no exceptions, and this is because we need to cover all of the interfaces. Because if we were to select one particular application in here. Let's say that we go with the Azure management. Or let's go with the Microsoft admin portals. That will only cover the admin portal. That will not cover PowerShell. This is why we need to have it targeting all resources, because we need to cover PowerShell, or as I said, AZCLI, Microsoft Graph, all of these requests that we can perform from our client towards the cloud service need to be protected by this kind of policy. And if we look in the conditions of this conditional access policy, you'll see that we have an exclude on a specific device ID. Now if we take this device ID and we'll look it up, in our little Entra ID tenant, we can see that this is the device called CCERT014, which is mine. All of the stuff in this tenant is mine, but whatever. And you can see that this is actually the device that we're on right now. Now I'm currently logged on as a global administrator, and you can see that, hey, I actually was able to log in. You can see this as well in the sign-ins of my administrative account, that my demo GA account logged in. If we're looking at conditional access, it says success, and the PAW policy says not applied, because the device I'm signing in from is actually excluded. So the ground control in this type of policy is set to block. Now, since this is a cloud joined device, so an Entra ID joined only, no hybrid, we don't want any splashback going into on-prem. So joining the device to Entra ID, in order to get, the control over it, we can use Intune. Maybe your Intune admins really need to be covered by the PAW policy as well, or they need to be if you're going that route. But we're using block to say, you need to be on the specific device, or these specific devices. So if we try to access my cloud from another VM, we use the same account that we did in the previous VM. You see that it says you cannot access this right now. So the credentials were validated, but we're blocked from accessing the cloud. Now the same goes for, of course, if we were to try PowerShell. So let's go connect Azure AD. I know this is a legacy one, but just to get your initial thoughts or initial ideas around this, you'll see that, yeah, we're actually covering these things as well. We get the same kind of error message. So we're blocked from accessing the cloud if we're not coming from the correct device. And that's how the PAW policy works in the cloud. Let's jump back into the PowerPoint. So the PAW scenario is more secure, because since we're strictly telling the cloud, hey, which device can I be on to get an access token, we're effectively blocking the possibility to use an adversary in the middle type of attack, because the device ID is protected by your TPM chip. You can't really steal it unless you can break into the device and if you can compromise the device, then yeah, the jig is up, of course. But the PAW needs to be monitored by the EDR and you, etc., etc., etc. Because the threat actor needs to be in possession of all your 3 factors at the same time. So you need to have the admin account with the username and password, you need to have the privileged access workstation, and you need to have the MFA credential. Now, delving a little bit deeper into privileged access workstations, here's some common pitfalls. So if you're running your regular workstation as the PAW, I mean the regular workstation where you answer email, join Teams meetings, watch YouTube, comment stuff on Facebook, whatever, it's not really a PAW. Because the PAW needs to be configured so that we need to be 100% certain nothing can be, messed with on this particular device. Because if the threat actor gets into your regular endpoint, compromises your account, and it can do whatever your account can do. So we can open the password vault where you keep your global admin credentials or whatever, and by that assume control over the cloud environment as well. So it's breaking the chain of trust, meaning we cannot trust that as a PAW. You need to have the PAW separate from your regular day-to-day operations. So if I go to if we take this laptop as an example, let's say that this is my PAW host. The sole purpose of this device is to host virtual machines. Nothing else. So this device will then host my privileged access workstation for the cloud, my privileged access workstation for on-prem, and it will also host a virtual machine for, day-to-day stuff, your companion device. So your email, your Teams, your whatever, Discord, for those of you out there. That's the most secure way to go. Now, a common question with this is, hey, can't we use jump boxes or like Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365? And while you can, technically, we're breaching the chain of trust once more. And that is because we are allowing a virtualization platform to control the PAW, meaning it's no longer a PAW. It's a jump station, yes. It's a secure admin workstation, yes. It's better than logging in from your corporate or your own device, sure. But in terms of defining a privileged access workstation, it's no longer a PAW. So the recommendation is to use a dedicated piece of hardware capable of running virtual machines, and you can keep them separate from one another. Because there's no way the virtual machines inside of your host can actually, you cannot break out of one VM and compromise the other VM, etc., etc., etc. Now there are some ways to break out of Hyper-V VMs, thanks to my esteemed colleague Alex at TrueSec, but it does come with some requirements for that type of attack to actually work. Basically, if you're running as an admin on the host, opening a PS remoting session to one of the VMs, it's a possibility that the threat actor could break out of the VM to compromise the host. But as I said, maybe that's not the bigger pain point that you're dealing with. Keeping it separate like this is infinitely more secure than running it on your regular workstation. So key takeaways. Verify explicitly. As we saw, the only way a global admin account can log into this particular tenant is if they're coming from a specific device ID. Use least privileged access, of course. I mean, don't overprivilege yourself or your coworkers just because it doesn't work anymore. use least privileged access at any time. Just enough, just in time. Assume breach. What's to say your corporate network is more secure than the internet? Basically treat your on-prem network as the internet and have security controls in place to combat that. Because chances are there's already a threat actor in your environment. You just don't know about it yet. And again, never use the same device for your regular stuff as for admin stuff. Keep Facebook off the PAW. Conditional access, again, that's the way we can achieve this. And there are, of course, a lot of other things we can use in conditional access. As I mentioned, step-up authentication or requiring higher levels of authentication. And on that topic, I just want to, when we're dealing with passkeys, how do they work in the PAW concept? Well, I mentioned the FIDO2 hardware key. That works great because we can expose the USB drive to the host and actually leverage the FIDO2 or YubiKey or Feichun key or whatever inside of the VM. That works great. Passkeys in the Authenticator app doesn't work at all. And that's because it requires Bluetooth connectivity. And it's kind of hard to get a VM to communicate outside of the hardware to another piece of hardware. It just doesn't work. Same goes for Windows Hello for Business. I mean, we can use Windows Hello for Business, but not in a VM. So you need to have the Windows Hello for Business, or we can use the Windows Hello for Business if we're using the PIN code. That's actually true. But we can't use, biometrics because we don't want to expose that to we don't want to use the biometrics side of Windows Hello for Business anyways, but you get the point, right? So find the one that actually works the best. And that's it. Thank you very much for joining this little session, and I hope you learned a bunch of things on how to deploy or use conditional access to govern access to the cloud for privileged administrators. And don't forget to donate. See ya.